Hello all, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking about reciprocity.com. The E is spelled with a 3. This is where I truly believe everybody should be able to get feedback on the things that they do. So in this particular video, I am going to talk to you about, will proofreading ever be automated by machines? I think this is a really interesting question to talk about. There's lots going on there. I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship. It actually is a really difficult question to answer. I think that there are 3 different things. I'm going to talk about them in terms of understanding whether it'll be automated by machines. So first of all, what do I mean by automated machines? This is where proofreading, you can actually just throw it, whatever you're doing, up into the cloud. Whatever's kind of written material you have, you throw it up into the cloud, and then the machine sort of corrects exactly what's going on and gives you the intended document that you'd like to have at the end of it, right? So it's fairly difficult. The reason why it's fairly difficult to solve this problem is language, and the meaning of language is constantly changing. Words are constantly changing. The meanings behind them are constantly changing. In fact, if you just look at sort of our language and understanding of language, even if you go back to the 1920s and 30s and how, you know, some people might have talked back then, it would have been a lot different than the way that we understand it now, right? You do the old, you know, that kind of thing, right? That's a lot different than what it is right now in terms of the language and how we interact. And that's constantly changing, so it's really hard to understand. And it changes not only within sort of over time, but it's changing within the location. There's every single location, wherever you have an interaction, it's slightly different, and everybody has their own sort of slightly take on language and how they write. So I think in terms of when automation is going to occur, it's essentially where it becomes so good that you can just put it up into the cloud and you come back and then you get, you turn a document that you would have gotten a C and it turns into an A. So there's 3 kind of different requirements that I require that I think that in order for proofreading to be automated by machines. First one is localization. This is within the particular context, within wherever the written material is there, that the machine understands and correctly understands that particular context, right? So that it's going to be able to understand sort of minor sort of alterations and kind of just tiny little mistakes in the machine or in the writing. And this is much more easier problem to solve. And I think some machines are getting closer to that in terms of how things are done. And in fact, particularly if you use like a crowdsourcing type behavior, right? Which is like what reciprocity is trying to do. And then the second thing that is getting better is, or that is difficult to solve, is that the computers have to understand the broader context of what you're writing, right? So this is looking at the entire document and understanding the entire document. Well, that's really difficult to do for machines to interpret everything that's going on in the writing, because they have to sort of envision and imagine what the writer is talking about and then be able to sort of move things around in its head and its mind, right? The machine's mind, the computer algorithm, to sort of interpret it in the correct way. This would be a lot more of like content editing. That's a lot more difficult to do, or copy editing. That's a lot more difficult to do than sort of just doing minor changes and proofreading, like small sort of proofreading changes and stuff. And then the third thing, so even if the computer gets that good and algorithms get that good, which they will get that good, probably, you know, I'm suspecting in 10 years, maybe 20 years, that they'll start getting that good, that they'll be able to read things fluently. And interpret things fluently, and as well as correct things fluently. The third thing is just trust. People have to trust the interpretations of the computer. They have to trust the computer itself, the algorithms itself. And that really takes a long time. It's difficult to do. I mean, if you take a couple of examples, if you think about, so the automobile, right? Autonomous automobiles, as well as the autonomous elevators. Autonomous elevators, you know, that they weren't, so most elevators were actually run by people years ago, and that you had an elevator attendant and it would go up and you would they would take you up and take you down, right? So the elevator attendant will actually make sure that it's running properly. But it took years and years and years before we began to trust these machines that were put into the elevators. And even when you look at autonomous cars, for example, it's not the fact that the technology is sort of inferior. It does work really well. Not a lot of accidents are happening with the Google car, for example. The problem that's sort of holding it up at this current moment, is sort of regulatory frameworks and understanding what are sort of legal concerns and all this kind of stuff that goes on in the background. The same with writing, right? So what if it gets so good that it can interpret this stuff and you can start putting legal contracts in there, and it's checking all the legal contracts out there on the web? Then who owns the contracts? What if it makes a mistake? Who's going to be liable for those particular contracts? Things like that are really big things to think about. And it's going to take a long time before people actually get trust in machines. Seems like it's a fairly easy problem to solve, but it's not, because there's lots of sort of little minor implications that go on behind the scenes that most people don't think about. And that's why we typically don't have a lot of trust in these things, in sort of the automated things. But it's going to happen. It's going to be a slow process, and it definitely does happen. And this process, if you don't know, it's called the diffusion process. It just takes a little bit of time for it to spread within a population, for people to become comfortable with it. The same goes with what I'm building with Reciprocity. Again, it's a sharing economy proofreading platform where you can double check your work and stuff like that. Well, it just takes time. Not a lot of people are using it, but that's just because I know it just takes time before people get used to the idea of this being there and they can start using it, and you can default to it. And it just takes a lot of time, a lot of grinding. These things take probably 10 years, 20 years before they actually become, a sort of growing concern for others. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for following along. I do appreciate your time and effort. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you on the next video. Bye.